Panel 4, Information Development and Humanitarian Assistance. On all of these panels, you'll notice that there are so many components to American influence and power, other than the military, that we've had to cobble some of them together, and that's what we have here as well. Information development and humanitarian assistance are all very discrete things, but they're cobbled together on this panel, and they'll address all of them in about 55 minutes. I'm very glad to introduce you to Dr. Kate Weaver, Associate Professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and also the Executive Director of Operations for Innovations for Peace and Development here at the University of Texas, one of the important programs that our students participate in. Thank you, Kate.
Okay. Is this on? It is on. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I am a development aid expert, which is weird to be invited to a Clements event. So I'm delighted to be used in this conversation. And I'm really honored today that we have three experts on international development and democracy promotion worldwide, who are going to, I think, collectively have over 80 years of experience in the field, in the real world, addressing these issues that are very important to the exercise of U.S. influence and soft power in the world. So I want to introduce everyone. This is Dr. Mark Pomar, who is currently a senior fellow here at our Clements Center. And prior to joining us at UT, he had a very long and distinguished career, first as a Russian scholar, and then in leadership roles at Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, both in Munich, and as director of the USSR Division of Voice of America. And then finally, as senior executive at IREX, the International Exchange
Research and Exchange Board.
I should get that right because they gave me 3 fellowships in graduate school. So thank you very much, Mark. And a very special congratulations to Mark, who has a forthcoming book called The Battle of Values: Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and U.S. National Security. It's going to be coming out, I think, just in time for Christmas?
No, next year.
Oh, okay, next Christmas. Okay.
Just in time for the midterms.
Midterms, excellent. And right next to him, Michael Greene, who has an amazing 3 decades of experience at the entity formerly known as the U.S. Agency for International Development. He's had all the really easy postings. He's been in Afghanistan, Peru, Croatia, Armenia, Dominican Republic, Bolivia, Bangladesh, and Ecuador. And at the end of his very distinguished career, he was mission director in Vietnam. And so he's a veteran of our aid industry, and I'm sure you've got plenty of war stories to share with us. And then finally, Daniel Balke, who has 2 decades of experience in international development aid, both at USAID, where he was recently senior policy advisor under Administrator Samantha Power, and then a career before and after USAID at the World Bank. And he's an expert in particular on issues related to development aid as it's used to address fragility, conflict, violence, and refugee crises. And he also has had a really soft posting in South Sudan as a country coordinator. And so apparently also Daniel and I, by the way, are intellectual soulmates because we both focus on the World Bank and international financial institution reform. I promise not to bring this up in the conversation. So today, I mean, we're the last panel, but I think we're one of the most important panels because it's really about the transition that we're seeing right now in our current administration, where for the past 2 decades, we have relied upon this tightly integrated approach where defense, diplomacy, and development have been seen as 3 pillars necessary to work together to pursue U.S. national interests. And in the last 10 months, we've seen 2 of those pillars be largely knocked down. And so we have many really important questions we need to be asking right now about the consequences or implications of the cuts to many of the critical programs and agencies at the heart of the U.S. work in global development and diplomacy, including the aforementioned elimination of USAID or its folding into the State Department. And as well as of March, we cut all funding to our long-standing global media influence programs of the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. And so we're entering this moment, just as this conference is talking about, where we're cutting critical tools of soft power and influence, and we're doubling down on a reliance of hard power through military force. We're asking to what end, and what will the cost be, or the risks of that particular shift. So I'm very pleased today that we have 3 experts to talk about these issues. So I'm going to start actually with a question for Michael and Daniel. And that is that it was very surprising to me that President Trump's very first move on Inauguration Day was not a really big, bold policy move, but he announced a cut in international aid. And everyone thought, what? Why was this the number one issue? And in particular, this was justified as a means of cutting waste and fraud and reducing the budget deficit, despite the fact that development and humanitarian assistance accounts for far less than 1% of our overall national annual budget. So the leading role of the U.S. has historically been seen as a key means of exercising influence abroad and supporting our national security interests, because aid redresses those risks associated with global poverty, economic instability, the backlash from natural disasters, and conflict-related humanitarian crises. Now this narrative is under attack. So what are your perspectives on this issue? Do you believe that development and humanitarian assistance are key to pursuing U.S. national security interests, and that are now being affected by U.S. bilateral assistance cuts? And what are the potential for the risks we're creating for ourselves in cutting these particular programs in terms of our ability to sustain our role as a leader in the world?
Well, since my agency was the one that was hacked off at the roots, I guess I'll start. The U.S. national security establishment since 2006 was the first time that the national security strategy included the three pillars that supported U.S. national security: defense, diplomacy, and development. And in every national security strategy since then, that framework has persisted, which reflected the consensus of the U.S. national security establishment that development was a key component of our national security for a number of reasons. We haven't gotten, it's supposed to be reissued every year, but every administration lags. We haven't seen a new national security strategy. I'm not sure when we will, or is there really a strategy in all the moves that are taking place? I'm not sure. But in any event, I think back in 2006, the first time development appeared as one of the pillars of national security, kind of front of mind were the attacks of 2001 and the risk of failed states and the fact that extremism and terrorism find root in many cases in places of great poverty and hopelessness. And so that was a major piece of that thinking at that time, I think. And so I won't delve into, we still have, Afghanistan. We'll see where that ends up. We've got the Sahel and other areas in Africa that both defense and development are now fading away from. We'll see what the long-term impacts of that are. But I'd rather focus on two other issues that I think are even more important in the near term. And the first is in global health and the fact that we have lost, I don't think people have a good sense of the importance and the expertise among U.S. government agencies and WHO, so between USAID, CDC, and WHO, in terms of infectious disease surveillance and action to address at its core before it spreads to the rest of the world. It's in this interconnected world, it's a new day on these zoonotic diseases that will spread like wildfire around the world. That capacity is essentially gone. I think WHO relied a lot on U.S. funding, most of which is reduced as well. And so these risks are, I think, catastrophic, and I hope the best for America and fear the worst. But the other issue is this issue of soft power that has come up repeatedly today. Different speakers have used different terms to try to get at what it really means. One speaker mentioned a model that was a mutual beneficial model that we displayed to the rest of the world that made us attractive as a partner. The fact that we won the Cold War without firing a shot, a non-kinetic war that was won by U.S. soft power, essentially. And the fact that the largest humanitarian aid supporter in the world is now gone, I think that was really an expression of American values. That's who Americans are, that we come to the aid of those that are fleeing poverty, fleeing war, and natural disasters. We've dismantled the capacity to respond to natural disasters. The military, of course, is good at that, but the USAID capacity I think, was first in the world. And as the world saw America there, where there was suffering, I think was a big component of U.S. soft power. And so I don't think that this is something that the Chinese are going to do. They do their Belt and Road, they do infrastructure, but I don't think that this is a space that risks being filled by the Chinese. But I think that loss of soft power is going to be especially deeply felt in the years to come.
Great point. Daniel.
Great, thanks Kate, and it's great to be on the panel, Michael and Mark, with all of you, and thanks so much for coming out. Look, I think the thing is that the problems that were being worked on are not going away, right? Whether it's public health issues and infectious disease, like Michael was talking about, whether it's our evolving environment, whether it's sort of conflict and violence risks born of economic deprivation and a lack of social cohesion, whether it's humanitarian crises, there is going to be a need for this work to continue in some shape or form. And all actors around the world, the United States included, have an interest in doing that work well and effectively. I think the way that we do that work is obviously going to have to change, probably in considerable ways. And I think, I won't speak for Michael, but during my time at USAID and just working in development more broadly, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone who would have said, before recent months, we're doing this perfectly. We don't need any considerable change. We've got it down. No, on the contrary, I think there was an openness and remains an openness, now born of necessity, to think in fresh ways about how we can more effectively address these global issues on the development side and on the humanitarian side. And one thing that I think is sort of the flip side of the dramatic nature of events that have happened in the recent period are that because they have been so dramatic, they really create a space, I think, for some very innovative thinking around how we in the United States and in other countries and with other actors across the globe can come at these issues in a different way. Some of the constraints that maybe held us back, some of the conventional thinking that held us back before, maybe there's more liberty to think a bit more creatively now. And that's why I'm super happy to see so many of our students here today, because we are going to need fresh thinking, and there's no one better to provide it than our young minds.
Yeah, these are great observations. I would add in the field of global health, I don't think people quite realize that in countries like Tanzania, over 50% of the healthcare expenditures were funded through U.S. foreign aid. And if you cut that off, you just turn off the spigot, what happens in the short term? Much less the medium and the long term. And particularly with PEPFAR being on sort of the chopping board and its future in question, we've also seen statistics now that up to 3,000 babies are born a day with HIV/AIDS infection because their mothers can no longer get ARV treatment. And so this is something that should concern us not just from a national interest perspective, but from, I believe, a moral perspective.
If I may add briefly to that, not only is the loss of U.S. Foreign assistance, humanitarian aid, but the way it was done. In countries like Tanzania, where 50% of their public health system was funded, from one day to the next, it was gone without notice. And they got no information about what was going to happen next. Was it going to come back or not? They got no information on an ongoing basis. A lot of local partners were working on a cost reimbursement basis, local organizations, and they were never paid. And so this kind of, not only the loss of the assistance, but the way it was done will leave a lasting wound.
It certainly has implications for our reputation and trust in the region that we might want to talk about. I want to bring Mark into the conversation. So since 1942, the U.S. has really supported critical media programs abroad through institutions like Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, which you have led. And this has been important to spreading U.S. values, but also countering foreign disinformation from countries like Russia and more recently China. And since you've had a leadership position in both institutions, I'm particularly interested in your answer to the question that I just posed to Michael and Daniel, which is, do you believe that eliminating these programs is going to undercut U.S. national security interests? And are we cutting off our nose to spite our face by eliminating these programs?
Oh, thank you very much. I'll start by saying that when I joined Voice of America as director of the Russian service back in 1983, one of the first things I learned was that the NSDD that had come out a year before, National Security Decision Directive, specifically mentioned the role of Voice of America in terms of broadcasting to the Soviet Union. It also mentioned Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty as ancillary parts of our approach. So that there was a clear understanding in the Reagan administration, which by the way also existed in the Carter administration and going back, that these were important, critical tools for communicating American values. What America did, obviously policies, approach, culture, we had very popular programs, we had popular music that was incredibly important, but beyond that, it was projecting how an open, free, democratic society functions and works, in terms of being rather critical. You know, the Soviet dissident movement, which was very important in bringing down the Soviet Union, got its inspiration from the US civil rights movement. Why? Because Voice of America broadcast about civil rights throughout the 1960s. And that's a very explicit part of what inspired them to do their resistance to the Soviet Union in a very non-confrontational way. Sort of fast forwarding, Voice of America has also been closed. As of March, there are no programs on the Voice of America. And you really have to think of the Voice not as a radio. People keep saying radio, radio. It's not a radio. It's a multifaceted media platform that does lots of video, lots of audio, podcasts. It's on YouTube. It's on Instagram. It's on every conceivable social media. It had a phenomenal website that could be accessed. And we're talking about hundreds of millions of hits on their websites, which they can track in places like Africa. Very, very important. And it has been abandoned. I may also add that the Russian service, which I know quite well and I follow, exceptionally well done, Ukrainian service was covering the Russian war against Ukraine in probably the fullest way of any media whatsoever. And it's no longer on the air. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, as a grantee, has been able to save some money and continue, but that money is going to run out in a couple of weeks. So basically, we have no Radio Free Asia, no Middle East broadcasting at a time when the Middle East is very important. You know, those of you who follow Iran, for example, where do you think a lot of that inspiration for women's rights, for the protests, they come out of the broadcasts in Farsi by the Voice of America and by Middle East broadcasting. We have abandoned, disarmed, but abandoned about 300-400 million regular viewers, listeners. That's hundreds of millions of people who no longer have anything coming out about the United States. So I think it's on a sheer level, every presidential administration until this one has acknowledged the importance of broadcasting. And so we're really in unprecedented territory.
It is interesting. We were speaking last night at the dinner about the fact that, you know, as the U.S. is pulling out, the country that's stepping in to buy a lot of the media platforms is China. And so after we talked, I called a colleague who works on election integrity in sub-Saharan Africa, and he mentioned that he's starting to notice that the ability to promote democracy promotion and and monitor elections is being significantly deterred by the fact that the media now is owned by China, and also the U.S. has cut assistance around democracy promotion programs worldwide. So this begs the question about, does the retreat of the U.S. with respect to this role in global media influence in Africa what does this mean for political narratives and public opinion in Africa, particularly around issues of democracy?
I think it will have tremendous impact, because one of the things that VOA did very well, it was very large in Africa, it was able to be on AM, FM, and local communities and be able to broadcast news. Those, of course, disappeared, as well as satellite transmission. And as I understand it, China has simply stepped in and filled in those. Someone earlier today mentioned some phenomenal figures. I know 7 billion that China has invested in worldwide international broadcasting. What we have spent is tiny amount. I like to use this figure only because it kind of gives a sense of, when you're in Texas, that the entire budget of all of international broadcasting done by the United States is less than 1/3 of the budget of UT. Less than 1/3 of the budget of just this university. And we're talking about worldwide. It is less than Russia, despite all of Russia's economic problems, which were described earlier today. It spends more on broadcasting worldwide than the United States. China, of course, is on a whole different level. So I think we've abandoned it, walked away, and received nothing for it. No quid pro quo. We just walked away, just disarmed. And I would also add, and this is for me maybe more painful because I know a lot of the people got thrown out of their jobs who have no place else to go. They can't go back to their home countries. Many of them would face arrest. They have given their best years to the United States. These are people from all over the world, whether they're from Africa, Middle East, or Russia, or so forth. And they're just thrown out on the street in the most cruel and nasty way. And so I think that there's a human dimension to it that particularly upsets me on that score.
Understandable. Well, going back to you, Michael, I like the idea of bringing this discussion down to a ground level. And so you have tremendous expertise in Vietnam since you served as mission director there. And this is a country that in recent years has been dealing with many, many problems, from economic and political instability, corruption, human rights violations. But it's also in a very geopolitically important place right now in the Indo-Pacific and South Asia. And in the Biden administration, they identify Vietnam as a really important geopolitical partner in the region. And we're very conscious of increasing aid and other outreach in order to ensure that Vietnam was at least incentivized to align itself more with the United States. What is the current administration doing?
It's been quite interesting, and there were developments just in recent weeks that raised the potential that the very transactional approach to foreign affairs of this administration, I don't know, maybe Vietnam is unique, but let me dial back and talk a little bit about the history. USAID was in Vietnam before there was formal diplomatic relations established between the two countries. USAID was in Vietnam in 1989 with a program to support persons disabled by Agent Orange, which was sprayed from U.S. planes as a defolianter in the war. And there's millions of disabled persons in Vietnam. And Senator Leahy of Vermont spearheaded that initial program. It started in '89. Diplomatic relations were reestablished in '95. And in many ways, the USAID program expanded more rapidly than the diplomatic relations side. And USAID, although in recent years the budget got larger and larger, and so we were in many areas, alternative energy and environment and disaster preparedness and so on. But a core part of the portfolio was these, what we called war legacy programs. And the war legacy programs were responding to a deep and emotional place among the Vietnamese in terms of There was a lot of unexploded ordnance there, and the demining was mostly funded by the State Department. But USAID had programs to support disabled persons, and I spent a lot of my time going through the highlands and horrifying disabilities. It's Agent Orange and the dioxin that was accidentally contained in it caused genetic defects that pass down through generations. And meanwhile, the bases, the U.S. bases where these defoliants were loaded onto planes were left with large toxic waste dumps of these dioxin poisons, which were leaching out after 50 years, have been leaching out into the communities around the bases. And so USAID did a major detoxification on the Da Nang Air Base, which is now currently part of the international airport there, which took about 5 years, and it was like $110 million. But then the final major detoxification was Bien Hoa, a place, a big air base outside of Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. And it was going to cost about $400 million. And USAID, and it was going to take about 10 years. And USAID just didn't have the funds to do it. For a number of years, we tried to convince the Defense Department to come in with us to fund this, simply because essentially they left it. And so maybe it was the right thing to do. And because of the geopolitical and defense implications. Vietnam confronts China on its northern border every day. China has been invading and dominating them for many years, and now with China's claims on the South China Sea, the 9-dash lines around the South China Sea, the Vietnamese have been very careful at balancing their defense relationships and alliances. They have a no alliance policy. They're friends with everyone, and including the United States. But the defense relationship was very important to the United States. So finally, when we finally convinced Secretary Mattis to come in with us and split the cost, we began this major project in Bien Hoa in 2017. And the Vietnamese contributed $90 million, and it was $150 from AID and $150 from the Defense Department. In any event, when suddenly assistance was cut off in the early days of the new administration, I realized, oh my gosh, we're 5 years into this project, and everything, all of that detoxification work is just laying open, dug up, waiting for the rainy season to come, and what a disaster this will be. And the Vietnamese didn't know what was going to happen, but they were pretty desperate for the whole thing. And then Secretary Hegseth was in Vietnam a couple weeks ago during his Asia tour and promised $130 million to continue these war legacy programs, which I think reflects sort of the transactional nature of this administration. And we want your close relations militarily, and we'll help fund some development projects, and therefore the USAID development projects have flowed over onto the DoD side. So I just think it's a very interesting case study, and I'm just delighted that the U.S. government is continuing to support the Vietnamese in that.
That's great. With some good news on the horizon. So, Daniel, I'd like to sort of pivot back to bigger questions about big changes in the international development landscape. So we've already been talking about the prospect of China's really stepping up as the U.S. is stepping back. Certainly with respect to Vietnam, it's right in the footprint of the Belt and Road Initiative and is likely to be a major recipient of Chinese foreign assistance. And so this has potentially huge consequences for U.S. Influence or soft power in many areas of the world. And these dynamics are likely to be exacerbated by the fact that our European allies are also stepping back with aid, particularly as they have to increase their defense budgets. So what do you think are the big implications of this? I mean, we're at a critical juncture. The whole international development aid landscape is shifting. What are going to be the consequences of that? Do you have any big high-level thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we need it all. I mean, demand for development finance, to say nothing of humanitarian assistance, the demand for development finance globally vastly outstrips the supply. That was very true before recent months, and it remains true now. And I think that, and it's not just China, you've seen other emerging donors step onto the field, and I think there's potential for that to be very positive, particularly as some of the traditional donors step back. The challenge and the focus should be on ensuring and doing what we can to make sure that that development finance is done in a way that supports sustainable development. That is sustainable from an environmental and a social perspective, from a fiduciary and a procurement perspective, and making sure that if we do have influx of development finance from new actors, that it's done in a way that is placing the people and the governments of the countries into which it is coming in the forefront, and really focusing on sustainability. And so I think, we need it all, but we needed to do the right things. But the truth is, the path to development is not going to come just from foreign assistance, right? That was true before, and it's true now. And I think that particularly as aid falls, that serves as a welcome impetus to really double down on a few things in our approach to development. One is, and this is not new, Michael will have focused on this across his career, but is really country ownership, right? Focusing on building strong institutions in developing countries to mobilize domestic resources, to manage public finance well, to have inclusive public service systems, to have enabling environments where the private sector can come in and invest. And that is the second thing that we really need to focus in on is de-risking economies so that the private sector can come in, invest in infrastructure, but also crucially create the jobs. We are going to have a global jobs gap on the order of several $100 million in the coming years. Development finance can help in closing that, but it's really got to be the private sector. And so I think as we think about the future of development, it's got to be around country ownership for sustainability, but doing what we can to de-risk private investment in developing economies.
Well, I can't help following up on that, because what we've seen recently is as the political and public appetite for public funding of international aid has dropped over the last couple of decades, we've seen greater sort of hope being put into the idea that through the private sector we can leverage billions into trillions, and that if we properly incentivize the private sector through seed funding, matching funds, risk guarantees, et cetera, that suddenly the private sector can give us at a much larger scale development finance than we ever had before. And yet the preliminary evidence is not encouraging. So are we really going to be able to make this shift, or are we really going to need to bring back public funding in the short term? Because I don't see domestic resource mobilization filling the gap either in the short term.
Again, we need it all. And it's not going to be a magic valve. And the idea of attracting private investment is nothing new. It's just, I think the recent developments have given impetus to focus even more squarely on that. I could speak a little bit about what we're doing where I work at the World Bank. I mean, I think we are focused like a laser on job creation. And our approach to that centers around sort of three pillars, right? And that is around infrastructure, not just physical infrastructure, but what we call foundational infrastructure, which includes physical infrastructure, but also human capital, strengthening the health, the education, the skills of people to acquire the types of tools that employers demand. It's around the enabling environment, right? The public policies, creating environments where businesses can predictably invest, earn profits, and reap rewards for their investment. And then it's about de-risking private investment. And so I think you've seen the World Bank Group really double down on using our blended finance tools, our guarantee products, in a more efficient and a more cross-institutional way to scale private capital in these economies. But we do need public finance. Multilateral development banks remain a great bargain in that regard. $1 of capital into the World Bank, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which lends to middle-income countries, can leverage you about over $30 in affordable finance for developing economies. That's a hell of a deal. That's why I think our shareholders have valued us across the years. But we also do need bilateral finance. And so We need it all. We need it to be done efficiently, and we need new approaches in this changing landscape to how we can squeeze the most development impact out of increasingly limited financial resources. And again, we need all the good, fresh ideas we can get especially from young people.
Yeah. Michael,
We
do you
have
wanna add?
a quick comment on that as well, is that the fact is, over the last 20, 25 years, there have been such profound changes in world poverty. The numbers of those living in poverty or extreme poverty have fallen dramatically by half over the last 25 years. And I'm making up numbers, but it's profound changes, most of which is due to development in China and India, led by the private sector, of course. And so when we talk about, gee, there may not be as much donor funding available from multilateral institutions and banks, the reality is that those efforts have been overshadowed by private sector investment for quite a while. So.
Well, in the sake of time, because I do want to leave time for questions, I'm going to do what the last panel did, which I'm going to end with a spicy question, if I can. So I always like to ask, if you could corner Secretary of State Marco Rubio in an elevator or hallway in the State Department for 2 minutes only, right? And you would have a chance to discuss the fate of these programs we've been talking about, what would you say? Mark's ready.
First of all, I don't think he has any influence whatsoever in the administration. So I would say those would be 2 minutes probably that won't get you very far. But that's,
well, I didn't think I could get you 2 minutes with Trump, so sorry.
I don't think that would work either. No, I think the key would be, and I think I'd like to use my little bit of time to sort of draw all of us together into one. People have mentioned the disappearance of USIA. I was an employee of USAID for a number of years, very proud of that. And it did more than just communication. It did student exchanges, academic exchanges, US exhibits. There was a whole array of programs that worked, that were non-military, but contributed to a more peaceful, developed world. I will also draw in USAID. After years of working in broadcasting, I was the chief of party for a USAID-funded program on media development, mostly in southeastern Europe after the wars in former Yugoslavia, but it extended to the Middle East. I had an office in Egypt, had an office in Jordan. And I think what is missing here is that it's part of a totality. It's not that there's USAID over there and there's the radios over here. We basically, in the best way, we work together as one integrated part of an American non-military approach to a peaceful world, if you wish, from many different angles, and many of us work back and forth in different parts of it. And I think that's an important element that has been upended, has been destroyed in many ways, and it's going to be very hard to put it back together. And I would sort of, if I were to talk to Rubio, I would say, look, look ahead in your life. How are we going to actually develop some of the tools we need going? As problems are not going to disappear. It's going to be a more complicated world, a more dangerous world. And I think we're going to have to, at some point, probably a new administration, really look at how to rebuild some of the elements. Not exactly the way they were. Maybe in a newer way, maybe in a more efficient way, maybe in a smarter way using technologies that are now available. But definitely that part, I think, of American national security is going to be very important to reestablish, to rebuild.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Michael and Daniel, I'm going to broaden the question just a little bit. If you could corner anyone in the current administration for 2 minutes, who would it be and what would you ask them? Say.
Daniel, please.
I think the first question I'd ask is, what's taking so long with this elevator? Why are we here for 2 minutes? No, I think more seriously, one of the most important reflections that I've had, certainly over the last few months, but even before, is around the criticality of listening closely and listening in good faith to people who you think you come at an issue with a different perspective than. Many in the room have strong perspectives on what's happened in the development landscape in recent months, what's ahead for national security policy in the years moving forward. I think the only path to salvation on these and really any issues, you mentioned it, issues are getting more complex, is to really listen with good faith and good intent, because if we keep talking, past each other, if we keep assuming that we are the only ones who have the right way and others don't know what the hell they're talking about, then I think we're only going to get more polarized, whether that's domestically, whether that's in the international system. And I don't mean to sound Pollyannish. I think it's really true. I think listening to some of the discussions across the day from the secretary this morning to others, I think him was talking about this on the last panel, you have to come into discussions with good faith and a pragmatic view to really find the nub of progress. And progress isn't always obvious, and it isn't always significant or even easy to detect. But I think I would try to do a lot more, in addition to trying to figure out what was going on with the elevator problem. I'd be trying to listen a little bit more than talking in that interaction.
Okay, very fair. Michael.
I wouldn't waste my time with Secretary Rubio because I'm sure there's a lot of true believers in this administration that are very committed and believers in the path that has been chosen. Secretary Rubio demonstrated through his career that he was a true believer in American. I didn't necessarily agree with him on all issues, but certainly he was committed to American democracy and American leadership in the world. And he seems to have strayed quite far from that task. I guess I would, and so there's no point in trying to convince him of the importance of the issues we're talking about here. But I would go back to the senators who always did have a commitment to America first in the sense of American leadership, quality American leadership worldwide, and who seem to have abdicated any commitment to that, and therefore really a commitment to American democracy. So I would say, what happened to y'all over there? That's what I would say.
Okay. Very Texan of you. Okay, we're going to open it up for questions now. So, yes, ma'am.
Hi, Jordan Skimmelhorn, Austin Knight, not a student, but former USAID. You've got a table with us here, so you all are preaching to the choir. I've got a question for Michael in your former capacity as mission director. So say it's hypothetically 2029, and then U.S. says, hey, we're back. We want to provide foreign assistance again. What are the biggest barriers you see to rebuilding, both operationally on the ground, the human capacity we discussed, and with respect to trust with partners?
Did you say 2029?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said 49. And I thought, well, it's a long time frame. I see the biggest impediment to a return of American leadership in foreign assistance is really the political problem that the majority of the American people did not strongly support U.S. foreign assistance because of the misinformation about how much resources were going into it. As we all knew in AID, if you polled Americans, they said, 20 to 25% of the U.S. budget was going into foreign assistance, and no, we don't support that. And so we had a situation that on the Hill, there was bipartisan support for these programs because they knew of the importance of it, but there wasn't a lot of public table pounding of support of it either. So I see the biggest constraint as the political leadership. Who's going to go on CNN first and say, gee, what we really need to do is bring back a robust foreign assistance program? I think it's not a great political issue. In terms of if a magic wand were waved in 2029, Sure, I think there's going to be all of the systems that we all worked on all of those years, that institution that, for better or for worse, there was a lot of reform that could have been done, but a lot of those quality systems in monitoring and evaluation of program quality, all of the stuff that we spent our days doing, that's all still there. And the people power are still out there. I think USAID people would come running back, but it's a tough problem.
Mark, you
I
want
just
to-
had a thought as you asked that question, that if you were to call it international investment rather than international assistance, you would have a phenomenally different attitude. So we are investing in countries that are therefore going to grow and develop and eventually be our partners. You could just and continue doing much the same work. I think that it's more a misnomer than it is, I think. And I think people on the Hill understood what the work was,
Yes.
whereas it was very easy to cast it in a very negative light in terms of political points.
Yes, sir.
Following up on the other question, I have one on messaging. Those of us who were sad to see the name USAID chiseled off the building were disappointed deeply, but we were also disappointed by the lack of any whisper of protest from the American people. I wonder whether USAID should be criticized for ignoring the messaging over the years on what it was doing and how much it cost. Should there have been a voice to America about what was happening in a way that would impact the sensibilities of the American public? And if indeed it can be reconstructed in international assistance, as was just hypothesized, what might be the components of that message and how might it be done?
Wow, good question.
Can I take that one as well? I feel like I'm dominating the conversation, but indeed, that's a USAID specific question. USAID was prohibited by law from essentially doing what you're talking about, spending resources to get our messaging out in the United States. USAID, I think, would have been delighted to do that. We tried to do it with robust information systems so that the information was there for the American people to get, but I think it would have been a game changer had we been able to get out there with true information about the costs and the benefits of USAID programs overseas, and we just weren't allowed to do it.
The same was true for the Voice of America, that was prohibited technically from broadcasting within the United States. However, once it went on the web and once it was internet, anyone in the United States could watch it and listen to it perfectly easily. But there was no allowance for actually projecting what it is that we did domestically.
And if I may, Daniel, you had a strategic role at USAID during this pivotal time. Do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I think a lot of investment was made, certainly by the administrator that I supported, to build relationships on the Hill. I think a lot of early weekend mornings were spent up there, and I think one of the more interesting things that happened was, I can't speak for her obviously, but was how quickly some of those relationships didn't come back in the form of strong defense of USAID at the critical hour.
Interesting. Okay, great. Oh, lots of hands. I'm going to get a few students in here, if you don't mind. So, Drew, do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. I know it serves a different function, but can you speak
Can
a
you-
Drew.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're good. Sorry. I know it serves a different function, but I was wondering if you guys could speak to the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, how that kind of fits into the larger picture of development finance.
I have a 3-hour lecture on that, Drew. Just corner me later. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to give my understanding. I mean, I think it plays a sort of a similar role to the International Finance Corporation, which is one part is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group in, a lot of de-risking of private sector investment, providing guarantees, making equity investments in firms, as I understand it. It's interesting that DFC has continued to sort of exist. And I think it shows potentially the attractiveness to policymakers who are perhaps not so fond of traditional approaches or public sector focused approaches to foreign assistance of orientations that are more centered around de-risking private investment. And so I think it's been very encouraging to see the progress that DFC has made. But one thing I will say is, I spend a lot of time engaging with my IFC colleagues, and crucial for them is that second pillar of the bank's jobs framework, which is around working with governments in the public sector to create an enabling policy environment for private investment to survive. That's critical for us at the World Bank Group. I also think that's critical for bilateral entities, including here in the United States.
It is interesting, by the way, that as all the other bilateral agencies have been cut, DFC actually has a $2 billion increase in the current bill. So we'll see if that gets passed.
Wasn't DFC stood up during Trump 1?
Yeah.
Under Trump 1, yeah, as it replaced OPIC, right. Other questions? Oh, wow, look at all these hands. Yes, ma'am. And then we have over here and over here. Yeah.
I'm Elena. I'm a senior fellow at the Clements Center. And my question is that I've heard in one of my classes a critique about foreign aid that created an unproductive amount of dependence on the U.S. abroad. And so I'm wondering what your response would be to this as experts in this space.
Yes, aid dependence.
Every day when USAID people get up in the morning and they think about sustainability they thought about sustainability of our programs, building good governance so that local governments could take over our programs and we transition out, sustainability of local organizations, trying to create other sources of revenue so that they can stand alone and be sustainable as U.S. foreign assistance stands down. And PEPFAR is an excellent example of a program that was across multiple U.S. government agencies. I'm not absolutely sure if PEPFAR funds are flowing or what the status of PEPFAR. There's such an information void about what's going on. It's quite amazing. The administration keeps saying things are still happening and funds are flowing, but we hear from the field that nothing's going on. But in terms of, let's talk about PEPFAR. The leadership of PEPFAR from the State Department on a daily basis was focused and asking how can we make this transition as soon as possible to host country ownership. It's a long process. Tanzania, 50% of their, I hadn't heard that statistic, but it doesn't surprise me, of their public health budget. So we have a situation where U.S. government assistance is saving lives by supporting their health system in a big way and making best efforts to back out as soon as possible. Is there a dependency there? Yes, and they are suffering from that dependency right now as they're absorbing this sudden loss of 50% of their public health. But it was kind of a bind. Do we want to help save lives? Yes. Did we every day try to do our best to reduce their dependence on us for their health systems and others? Yes.
If I could just add, a USAID program that I ran in the late 1990s was a private sector development. So the idea was that we would be helping develop private media that would then be able to support itself through ads, through increasing their circulation and so forth. So the idea was it was a short-term private sector development program funded by aid, which we also drew on American private sector co-funding to do. So it's a much more complicated picture than most people realize. It's not just a giveaway. It's actually a program to get them to the level that they can survive on their own. And we had quite a few examples of media that did very well.
Okay, we are actually out of time, so my deep apologies to those of you who still had questions. Hopefully the speakers may be able to talk to you after the panel. But I want to thank all the organizers in the Clements Center for this wonderful conference, and thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. So the employees of the